Hey guys, Dane from Scoggin-Dickey Parts Center, and we're back in the dyno. Of course, you can see here in front of me, this is not an LS engine or an LT, and it's not a big block or small block. We've had a lot of customers ask after our camshaft shootout for the Gen 3 5.7 Hemi, as well as the 6.4. They want a little bit of loving from a Hellcat. So we've got it here. We've got it in the dyno. This is a little bit of a Frankenstein's monster of OEM components, but overall the information you're going to have is going to be pretty straightforward. So we're going to do a baseline on this setup, and we have a lot of work ahead of us. Gordon has been working feverishly trying to get this whole project put together, and thankfully we've been able to get back here in the dyno, and it's time to do some science.
Yes, science!
So this right here, you can see it's not an orange block, it's a red block. So we do have a red eye bottom end. It's a stock red eye crank with manly rods and pistons, because we are going to be throwing a lot of boost at this thing. Not just with this blower, but we're going to be doing some camshaft comparisons. We've got a few different cam grinds that we want to run through the, I guess you could say, the veritable gauntlet on this dyno. And so we've got a few camshaft grinds. We'll finish up with the overall best candidate that we found with that one. And then we're going to start doing a few different blowers. So we do have our stock Hellcat supercharger on here. This is a stock pulley, stock inlet, stock throttle body. No porting has been done to this thing. Stock cooling bricks, all of this stuff stock. So it's really going to be a good baseline. Now, of course, you guys are going to probably see the dyno numbers for this and then look at the brochure numbers for anybody's Hellcat on the showroom floor and going to go, but Dane, that doesn't match. Well, yeah, it's not going to match, because the way that they dyno that is based on, you know, SAE standards and with emissions, and they've got the accessory drives. They don't have long tube headers. They've got the shorty SRT manifolds with cats and a full exhaust and all that fun stuff. We don't have that, which is why we do a baseline. So that way, we're not just throwing numbers at you after we've already done everything, like, you know, it's magic. We actually have a baseline so that we can show the gains between what we have now versus the other camshafts, as well as the blowers that we do here later. This is going to be an extensive project. We've blocked out pretty much the entire week in the dyno cell, which for you guys that understand that, that's a lot of time. We have a lot of work ahead of us, and we wanted to make sure that we can get this done in a proper manner without rushing through it, and to get you guys some clean data for you to be able to make some choices for whenever you're doing your own personal builds. As these Hellcat engines and everything start to, you know, show up more and more in either salvage yards or if you're buying things secondhand, we also have these brand new in a variety of you know, forms and flavors off of our own website. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and do a baseline pull on this one, make a few rips, get everything optimized, and then after that we'll talk about the results before we start messing around with the camshafts. Okay, so we just finished up our first little batch of initial start and baseline run on this, and did pretty good. So once again, like I had said, this is a baseline so that we can get gains off that baseline and go from there. Instead of doing, you know, like I said, you're not going to have brochure numbers for what we get off this baseline. So also, this is a Hellcat. You've got Hellcat cam, Hellcat blower. It's got forged internals, of course, but this is running on a red eye crate controller. So this is going to be your OEM style controller that you have for your crates. We're able to access that and tune it using HP tuners. And so we did our baseline. It made 701 at 6200 RPM, which is at the red line for the controller. So for you guys that are wanting to get a little bit more out of it, you're going to need to bump the rev limiter up a little bit. So Gordon went ahead and did that. We moved the red line up to 7,000 RPM, and we added a little bit more fuel, 4 degrees of timing, and adjusted the cam just a little bit. And on top of that, we made 780 horsepower at 7,000 RPM. So there we have it. That's a good baseline for us to start off with. This is with the stock Hellcat cam, stock blower and everything. We're not going to make any changes right now with the blower. It's just going to be camshaft changes. From here on out, instead of running the red eye controller, we're going to be running it on the Holley Dominator, as well as we're going to be locking out the camshaft from here on out. Just that way we have apples to apples changes and no camshaft moving or anything else like that. So really good baseline. We're excited to see the results for the camshafts as well as the blower. So make sure that you stick around for all of that. And I'm going to, after all of this video is done, I'm also going to build up a little chapter so that you guys can click through and follow along with what's going on throughout the whole build process. So we're going to go ahead and let this thing cool down some more. It's still a little warm, and we're going to go ahead and do the camshaft swap for our first setup, and we'll do some rips and we'll talk about the results later.
And minus it back out.
A little more?
It's better for track attention too. Right.
Really what we're going to do is just kind of a breakdown on the dyno pulls. I've got all of our charts set up so that way we can do A to B comparisons on all of this. And then we'll talk about our findings on it, and of course the importance of why we do these tests. Everybody's got their own cam grinds and everything. there's a lot of different popular cam grinds that are out there. We're not going to say which ones are better or worse or which one you should specifically go for, just without having more information about your build. So that's the importance of the fact that we've got people that are actually working here actively, that are learning along with us on a lot of these components, and to be able to help spec out your builds as as it comes around. Because say one of you guys have probably got stock exhaust, you just want to get a little bit more tone out of it or anything, there's a specific cam grind for you. There's other guys that are going to be running, a 426 stroker with a different blower and everything else like that. Might even also have the fact that you've gone through and done a lot of work dropping the weight out of the car. That same camshaft that we recommended for customer A is not going to be the same for customer B. So really, we're going to go through this. We've got a few different camshafts we wanted to test on this, and then after that, we'll go through our results with the blower testing. So starting off, we did our baseline. Of course, that one was important because the fact that if you don't have a baseline, you don't have any other information to show other than, oh, hey, it made this power. So stock baseline, now just to remind you, on the stock baseline, we did this with the red-eye stock controller. So we used HB tuners to access it. We had to move the RPM rev limiter up. Now, of course, because of the fact we weren't able to data log the boost manifold pressure that we had compared to the Holley and everything else afterwards, but still gives you a good idea of where everything is. So we've got just kind of a basic boost line out for that as far as that's concerned. And so, of course, max 780 horsepower, max torque was 692 pound-feet of torque. And of course, this one was really nice just because of the fact that, I had said this before earlier in the discussion for whenever we did the introduction, is that the power numbers that we make on the dyno are not going to match what you have on, on your brochure. Okay, everything that shows in the magazines and everything else like that, you guys have got the numbers memorized as far as how much horsepower your Hellcat's going to make stock.
Wow. You can read the brochure.
This is an engine that is in a controlled environment that's not running all the EPA rigging. You don't have all the serpentine kit and everything else like that. We've got full-length long tube headers, no cats, no exhaust. It essentially is going into a giant exhaust pipe that goes actually out into a vent that goes outside into atmosphere. So you're not having to deal with full exhaust with cats and mufflers and all the other bends and everything else like that. So the power difference is not the thing that you need to focus on. When we do these comparisons, the gains is what's going to be important, or even the losses. So there's going to be some things to be able to pay attention to this whenever we go through these. The main changes that we did on the stock calibration that's on the red-eye crate is that we made a change to the rev limit, just because of the fact that the rev limit comes on like super hard on that one, and we're actually wanting to spin this motor up. We actually had valve springs already installed, so that way we can go through with the cam install without having to mess around with that. And so those are packed 1232X valve springs, and so that's something important to note for that. And so we ran those valve springs from the stock camshaft all the way on through, and so they did really good. And this is one thing that we wanted to make sure that we didn't have any worries or issues about valve control as we started to spin this engine. Okay, so moving from the stock baseline, and then we changed the RPM up to that. So with the stock baseline and tuning, just to change the rev limiter, we did 780 horsepower and 692 pound-feet of torque. And then we moved on to our next camshaft. So we wanted to start off with that one, which we stuck with afterwards. The main changes between the stock baseline as well as this run for the 223-241 camshaft, it was just the camshaft, and we moved from the red-eye crate controller over to the Holley Dominator. Other than that, any other corrections were really just made for fueling. We're not trying to chase crazy peak numbers going between one camshaft versus the other. That way you have a really good idea of what the gains are between the two. So going from the stock camshaft to the 223-241, we moved up to 829 horsepower and 715 pound-feet of torque. That's a gain of 48 horsepower and 23 pound-feet of torque. And that's across the board. It's not just like it's losing it all on the bottom end and then just only gaining up in the top end. This is essentially like shifting it up by almost 50 horsepower and 20 pound-feet of torque. Boost was going through pretty well. We had most of it was ranging from 6 to almost 8 psi at redline. So the other thing that we've experienced a lot, and you'll see this all over the place. For you guys that know me pretty well, I was in the 3800 community before all this, and the guys with the M90 blowers were like, they'd add a cam, like, oh, we lost boost. Well, you made more power. It's something that's really important. So focusing on the boost pressure number is something that's going to be a rookie mistake. So that PSI that you're seeing at for your intake, when it drops, that means that the engine is making more power more efficiently instead of making the blower work more. So really, you're doing two things. You're gaining more power out of the engine and you're making your blower work less. So usually what happens is some people are going to want to keep that peak boost number or whatever, and so this is usually where you'll install a camshaft and then you might pulley down a little bit if you have the ability to do so. Other than that, some people are just fine with not messing with the blower. Maybe you just want the OEM quality on the blower and don't want to, you've had, maybe some bad experiences before with doing that, and you decide you want to keep the blower stock, but you want the chop, you want a little bit more efficiency out of it, and you gain some power. This is a great way to do it. So of course, boost dropped, but you gained power, and so your IAT is going to be lower. You're going to have better efficiency out of the blower. The blower's not going to have to work so hard, and I mean it's kind of a win-win situation all the way across the board. This is not a rowdy cam. These camshafts are really designed more for a stock setup. That way you're not having to pull the transmission, do the torque converter and all the other stuff. Now of course, if you are wanting something more rowdy, we do have other camshafts for that, especially the Spicy Special. So moving on from the 223-241, we are going to do a popular camshaft grind, 226-234. And so this is why we test. So going from our 223-241 to the 226-234, there's a drop in power. The actual loss was 17 horsepower and 12 pound-feet of torque. And this is like across the board, all the way over. But you notice on the curve that the boost is higher. So you lose a little bit of power and you're making the blower work more. Essentially, you would say that the engine's a little bit constipated, so to speak. You're not moving the airflow quite as much, and so the blower is actually starting to stack boost. Now, I mean, it's not by a huge margin. So of course, this is a camshaft that is a common one throughout the community that a lot of people like to use. And we're not saying that this is a bad camshaft or anything else along those lines. It's just why we test. We have a few different cam grinds that we're wanting to test, and this is one that we used as a benchmark. So moving from the 226-234, we're going to go and do our next camshaft grind that Gordon worked out, and this is 226-241. Really, the main focus on this test was trying to find the sweet spot for our lobe separation on all these camshafts. So you're going to notice that, for one, the lift on all these is essentially going to be the same. It's about 610 lift on intake and exhaust. The duration is one thing that we're playing around with. We're trying to maximize the duration that we can play with on these cams without, you know, having to fly cut pistons and do anything else crazy like that. And then the main focus is the lobe separation angle. So essentially, if you look at it like this is going to be your intake and your exhaust, what we're doing is we're messing around with the numbers here to move the lobes closer together. So normally the stock Hellcat cam is like super, like it's way out there. The lobe separation is way out there, and so the overlap is almost, it's essentially, I believe it's non-existent. So moving it closer, we're trying to get a little bit more overlap, but also trying to see what the engine and blower does whenever we do so. So this one moved further along the lines of more overlap with a closer LSA, trying to get that moved around, and of course we lost power. We started to lose boost as RPM went up. So of course this is one that, you know, I'm not saying it's a bad cam, it's just that it, compared to the 223, 241, it's moving in a direction that we wouldn't want, but it's the reason why we're testing all these cams. So moving from the 226, 241, moving to the 228, 241. So with the 228, 241, still down on power. We're down 28 horsepower and 21 pound-feet of torque, but boost came up by a lot. We ended up having, boost was staying right around 8 PSI to 9 PSI at redline, which of course you're down on power and you're making your blower work more, which is going to be something that you really wouldn't want. And then of course, you know, say you want to, you know, run something that has a different pulley combo, you're going to want to move the boost up and everything else like that. This is, you're going in the wrong direction and you're forcing through a problem that exists. So the other thing that we did is, well, let's go ahead and toss a 10% lower pulley on this. And so with the 226, 241 versus the 228, 241 with the 10% lower, still very, very close. But of course, as you can see, the 226, 241 on a 10% lower, the boost was around 10 to 11 PSI, whereas the 228, 241 on the 10% lower was 12 to almost 13 PSI for only a gain of 11 horsepower and 11 pound-feet of torque. They're close, but honestly, if you're wanting to make the blower work as efficiently as possible, the 226, 241 is probably the better of the two. So 10% is on the effective diameter of the lower pulley, and so you're making the blower speed increase. So there's a lot of discussions about, you know, finding the sweet spot for blower ratio for upper and lower pulleys and all that, and we had some fun with that, as you'll probably see in the video later on whenever we start really pushing these blowers. Okay, so after we finished this up, we had a kind of a team meeting and discussion about which camshaft we wanted to use moving forward with the other blowers. And just because of the fact that we were really surprised with the outcome on this one. But we went ahead and moved back to the 223, 241 camshaft, and then we started to make changes with that one.
We told the blower manufacturers what the RPM that we were wanting to turn it to, and we asked them what they wanted the blower speed to be at. So they set all of the max speeds. So it was with Magnuson, it was about 26,000. SDG, he told us what pulleys he wanted on it, as well as the other ones. So
to discuss, I guess, some of the stuff for science, a lot of these things were done for the sake of being able to repeat the results over and over again. The nice thing about the scientific method is you try to control as much as possible and you only change one thing at a time. So that way, say, you know, one of the other guys out in the industry, they've got an engine dyno and they want to do the same components and test it there, it's easily comparable. Every single one of our runs that we did, the run we would start off, get the engine up and to an operating temperature. We'd run the dyno cell to where the correction factor was stabilized. So that way it's not like it was still dropping, so we start to make a rip, then of course it throws the correction factor out and you get really weird numbers. We try to get it stabilized as much as possible. Now of course throughout that week, you know, we're in Texas and we're in the panhandle of Texas, so we have weather changes throughout the day. We could have it 80 degrees one day and it'd be snowing the next, and we've seen that. One of the important things about this was that we would do a dyno run and we would let the engine idle for 2 minutes as everything circulated. So the coolant and everything was still circulating through the engine. You have your water circulating through your supercharger back into that reservoir. The Chili Willies is still set to 55 degrees. And then at 2 minutes, we go wide open throttle again. And we'd let it idle again, do 2 minutes, and then go at it again. So we did 3 back-to-back runs. And essentially what I did is I picked the best out of all these 3 runs each time. I don't have the time to try and average all of the information on this because I'd be here for a month trying to transcribe all that. But that's what we did. So everything was back to back, and it was really a great show of the durability of everything on this Hellcat engine, because of the fact that, you know, it's got forged rods and pistons, and everything else was doing really, really well. And really the only major mechanical issue that we had was with the belts. So yeah, it's amazing.
We do a lot of thinking. We do a lot of planning that goes into this. You know, mostly even when we're planning out the process of what we're doing, we always plan to have the last camshaft in there. We all kind of put our heads together. We've been doing this for a long time, and we're usually pretty good at this. We can figure out which cam is going to make the most power, and we land on that one so that it saves us a couple hours. In this instance, we were wrong. Ended up having to go back down to the 223 241 versus the 228 241, because essentially what we gathered is just blowing the horsepower out the exhaust. That's all we could come up with. We were wrong on that one, but that's why we test things. When we start talking about this blower testing, what we did was we monitored intake air going in the throttle body, intake air after the rotors have compressed it in the top of the lid, and then we monitored intake air after the cooler bricks have gotten it. And we'll post all that stuff up on the screens as we go through. Some of these blowers put out a whole lot of heat. Some of these are actually very efficient blowers. The IHI is a very, very efficient blower with a very, very efficient cooler. So I will tell you how we did this test. We had a little setup. We have a device called a Chili Willy that we use on our Copos that are at the racetrack, and they'll cool the car down in no time. What you can do with this Chili Willy is you can set the actual temperature of the water inside the tank, and then we use that as our coolant tank. So we would start each pull. Each time we started the blower test, we would start it at a certain temperature, which I believe was 55 degrees.
Yep.
Starting temperature was 55 degrees. We would monitor the water going into the blower, and we monitor the water going out of the blower to see how much heat that it was actually pulling. Most of the water going in the blower, it was always 55 degrees. We didn't heat that tank up. We couldn't overcome the Chili Willy tank, but we could see how much heat was going into the water outside on the outlet side of the supercharger. Well, I will address one thing that I know that people are going to say, why didn't you do any ported blowers? The reason why is because it's not a fair comparison when there's ported snout versus somebody that is making their own snout. So what this one's going to show you is what SDG wanted his blower speed to be set at versus a R223 241 cam with a stock blower. And you'll see very good gains. Now I will say, there's a lot of people that are running this blower that are going to say that this power is down. Keep in mind, our DA during all of this testing was in the 5,000 to 6,000 foot range, which correction factor takes care of on an NA engine or a turbo engine that you can control the actual boost pressure. What you can't control is you can't control the amount of air that the supercharger is pulling in. So automatically, all of our supercharger testing is going to be about 2 pounds down from what the exact same pulley setup will see somewhere else besides here. Essentially, we are in the Rocky Mountains, but we're really not. So our corrected numbers are still 2 PSI down from what they would be basically anywhere else in the country except for Denver and here. But what you'll see is that this thing gained 170 horsepower over the stock blower with the stock pulleys and our camshaft. So if you took your Hellcat that was already camshaft or already cam swapped with our cam and put on an SDG blower and pulleyed it up with the 10% lower and the 310 upper, you're going to see 170 horse gain. You'll actually see a little more than that if you're not, like I said, in Denver or here. Okay, so what this one is a test that Jesse wanted us to run on his 2 different superchargers. These are both 2.4s, and what he did is he took the plate that mounts the front of the rotors, and both of them have a little bit different CNC pattern. The street plate looks like it has a little more gusseting in between the 2 rotors. So what it looks like is that the street picked up horsepower and torque down below about 5,500 RPM all the way up to 6,000. And then it lost horsepower and torque at the very top. This is kind of what we had gathered that was going to happen. He kind of prefers the street plate for his TRXs and things like that. I would talk with Jesse at SDG and see what he would recommend for whatever you're building. But there is a noticeable difference between the street plate, especially down low. It does pick up boost down low. I know there's going to be people that say that I have mine pulleyed. I have mine with more pulley on the top, a 285 on the top, or a 295 on the top, or whatever. There's a reason why there is a max blower speed, and we're gonna put a picture up of what happens when you overspeed, especially at 2.7. 2.7s like to explode. So this is what he has figured out, that the max blower speed needs to be based on engine RPM. Now, if you have a 2.85 upper and you're only spinning at 6,500 RPM, you have a lower blower speed than what we have at 7,000. So keep that in mind. This next test, what we did was we took the 2.4 Extreme off and we put the 2.7 on. 2.7 is a little bit larger blower. We had it turned down just a little bit because we can't spin it as fast because the rotors are physically bigger. You've got more inertia and everything else. But what was surprising is that there was a 30 horse gain almost all the way across the board from just the 2.7 to the 2.4, even with it pulleyed down. I would have lost that bet because I thought that the 2.4 running a little faster would have made a little more power, but it did not. The 2.7 not only made more torque, it made more horsepower, and it was a straight line from when we got on it to where we got off. More boost, more torque and more horsepower. Yeah, so the 2.7 is actually a very, very good blower. Okay, so this one's a little bit of a surprise. We had a late arrival show up and wanted to be part of the fun. So we're gonna show you what this one would do bolted onto your car.
Is that a monkey?
So this one, what we did is we're overlaying it against our 223, 241 versus a stock blower baseline, which was, I believe, 830 horse. This is the Kong 2650. So what we did is we kind of pulleyed this one the same as the rest of them, because Greg sent a lot of pulleys with it and said, do what you want. So the first one we did is we did it with a 10% lower and a 3% or 3-inch upper, and it was surprising. About 1,150 horsepower with a 330 horsepower gain. Boost we saw was up to about 19, I believe. Yeah. Contacted Greg, told him what we found, and he said, keep going. So that's what we did. So then we went from a 15% lower to a 275 upper, which is rather spicy especially for a stock cubic inch engine and everything else. This ended up with 1,230 horsepower, a 77. We got 77 horsepower just by doing that one single mod, switching it from a 10% to a 15% lower and dropping a 1/4 inch on the top. What we did find is with this pulley setup on a stock cubic inch engine, it does have trouble holding on to the belt. We made a lot of belt dust in 2 pulls, and this thing, I had the AAD idler on it. I had that belt wrapped as tight as I could get it. So this would be about max that I would ever do. It didn't physically smoke the belt with this setup. What it did was it just made a lot of belt dust. Yeah. Made 2 pulls and ended up with a lot of belt dust, which we'll show you in the video. So what you'll see in this little video is the amount of belt dust here is from a couple of pulls with the 275 upper and a 15% lower. This blower at the time of this test is in its early stages of production, and it hasn't been released to the public yet. There is another one out there with a 426 cubic inch that is running a 15% lower and a 250 upper, but they are not running near the boost because they have the cubic inches to actually eat it. I think that with a stock cubic inch motor, 275 you're going to have trouble holding on to. I think 15% and a 3-inch upper would probably be where I would stop, but that's up to your discretion. We're just showing you what we found. We ended up with about 24 pounds, 25 pounds, yeah, in between 23 and 24 pounds, which again, we're 2 pounds down here.
Yeah, so if you guys are going to be running this thing at the track or anything else like that, make sure you've got quite a few spare belts, because you're probably going to need them, especially if you're at an event where you've got to, you actually managed to do really well and you've got multiple passes you've got to do. That belt is going to be screaming for help.
What we learned on the Kong is that it will make just about as much power if you will just keep pulling it up, as long as the belt will hold on. I think you're going to have trouble with, if you're trying to put this on a car and just run pump gas, you'd have trouble with anything more than about a 10% lower and maybe a 3.5 upper. Because with a 3-inch upper, you're at 1,159 horsepower, which is a hell of a lot for a street engine. One thing I will mention about what we did with the Kong is that we used the PWR cooling bricks instead of the IHI stock bricks, because we do know that the 2650 rotor pack does put more heat into the air charge. Okay, so it looks like on the Kong we had supercharger room, or the room temp before the supercharger was just under 100 degrees. Coming out of the rotor pack, it ended up being around 300. And after the PWR bricks, it barely even broke 100 at the top. But it was pumping the heat out, that's for sure. Didn't put out near as much heat as the jack shaft did. The jack shaft made a lot more heat down low. Also made a hell of a lot more torque down low. But that Kong 2650 is going to be a contender in just about everything. You know, we're not trying to compare blowers because they all have their niche, their thing that they want to do. You know, one of the things that gave the Kong an advantage is the fact that they do utilize the 130 millimeter throttle body, which is going to, as of making this video right now, there's not really a good cold air option for the 130 millimeter throttle body. That's, I'm sure, coming. I would like to see SDG make their own, since he makes his own snouts. I'd like to see an IHI with a 130 millimeter snout on it. That would be a really cool thing, and I think he'd pick up a substantial amount of horsepower. We went from that one to the Magnuson hot rod jack shaft, and this thing is a beast, to say the least. I haven't seen a positive displacement supercharger put that kind of torque down early like that ever. So what we ended up having to do, because we didn't want to mop, we ended up raising the starting RPM to 5,000 RPMs instead of 4,000, mainly because this thing started to sound like a tractor pull engine. This thing made well over 1,000 foot-pounds of torque at 4,000 RPM. All the boost was there, everything else. Well, we did have, we had some trouble holding on to, we lost some belts in this one. We tried changing the rear cog from a 38 tooth drive to a 30 tooth driven, from a 36 30 driven, and we ended up losing the rear belt. It was just too much. Boost came in super early. It was a lot to do with the load settings on the dyno and the way that it was loading it up. But this thing made well over 1,000 foot-pounds of torque at 4,000 RPM, so we decided to punt, and we were going to go to 5,000. And we ended up with a pulley setup that would hold it. We went back to the 36 in the back, driving a 30. And then we tried a 275 in the front, and that's when we lost the front belt. That was with a 15% lower and a 275 on the upper jack shaft. We smoked the belt pretty good on that one. So then we went to a 15% lower and a 3-inch belt. That ended up being the one about all that we could get it to hold. If we had it a little longer, we could. There is some products on the market that would allow you to move the jack shaft up. put a bigger rear cog on it, and put a bigger front drive on the jack shaft and be able to get the power in late or earlier like that. But the blower RPM that you would be able to get is still going to be what we're getting right here. With the 15% lower and a 3-inch upper, we ended up with 1,154 horsepower and 1,022 pound-feet of torque. But the way that this thing came in was incredible. If you want to have your car do wheelies at the track, this is the supercharger that is going to do that almost every time you want it to. One thing that we did want to talk about is on this one does put a substantial amount of heat out of the blower. So one thing I will say is that the cooling brick inside of the Magnuson jack shaft is a very good brick. So what we were I think ambient room temperatures were about 60 degrees. Air temperature coming out of the rotors looks like we touched 300 degrees. And the brick was able to get it down to, the highest it ever saw was 110 going into the cylinder. So which is, I mean, it's pulling 200 degrees out of it. That's pretty good. And the water heat load was the same. The water was pulling it out. So that tells us that the brick inside of that Magnuson is good. But what that will also do is if you don't have a tank in the back of the trunk on a Magnuson jack shaft supercharger, you're going to have some trouble, especially in a true street event where you're running 3 passes back to back. If you're just running 1 pass down the drag strip and you're going back to the pits and cooling it off, you won't have any problems without a coolant tank in the back. But if you're running one of these, I would definitely run an ice tank in it. But we are very impressed with the Magnuson 2650, especially the early amount of torque that it has. It is unmatched throughout anything else we did. And we do want to thank Magnuson for being involved with this project. So this one is the Magnuson 2650 Magnum. And what this supercharger is essentially made for the 5764 Hemis. They flanged this one up so that we could run it on this Hellcat test, just to kind of show you what it would do. It's a really good blower, and it is a 2650, and torque comes in early, just like the other one does. So what we did is we compared it to a stock, our stock baseline with the 223, 241 cam and the stock blower. We ended up seeing just a hair over 20 PSI. This was with a 15% lower and a 275 upper, which is kind of what we figured out that the 2650 rotor pack likes on the 6.2. We kind of figured that out on the other blower as well. What I will say is that the Magnuson 2650 Magnum has a dual pass intercooler on the top, and what we saw in the test was that it was actually bringing the supercharger cooler temps down. So what we did find is that the 2650 rotor pack puts out a lot of heat, and we found that on the Kong, the Magnuson, and this blower as well. The 2650 rotor pack puts out a lot of heat. But what we found with the Magnum was that with it being a dual pass intercooler set up inside, it was actually able to get 30 degrees lower after cooler temps into the cylinder than the blow-through single on the bottom of the jack shaft Magnuson. So the cooler setup inside of the Magnum is substantially better than what the one underneath the jack shaft. But the jack shaft, the jack shaft they both have their place. The jack shaft blower is definitely one that you could play with a lot. You could change all of the pulleys on the back to change the way that it brings the torque in and blower speeds and everything else. There's a lot of different things that you can do with the jack shaft versus the Magnum. I would like to see Magnuson make a 130 millimeter throttle body snout for the jack shaft because that would be a game changer. I think it would pick up a substantial amount of horsepower just by doing that single mod. Okay, next up we did our 3-liter Whipple with a 108 throttle body. Whipple told us 18,000 RPMs is what they run at, so that's what we ran it at. That is a 10% lower with a 3.5-inch upper, which is easy for a belt to hold on to, so we didn't really have to worry about belt slip. Ended up getting about 18 pounds out of it. What we did find with the Whipple is with their dual pass setup, and the Whipple rotor pack is honestly a little more efficient than the 2650 rotor pack is. It doesn't put out near the heat. With it being a dual pass intercooler like the Magnuson Magnum is, you have 2 chances to cool the air down. So we were seeing sub 100 degree intake air temps going into the cylinder actually. So we did find that the Whipple is a very efficient blower. If you're running true street events and things like that, the Whipple is probably the one that I would run because you're not going to heat the water up as much. You're not going to have to worry about IATs as much as you will with the other ones. And it was able to achieve 1147 horsepower at 18 pounds, which is a lower boost level than the 2650 rotor pack is, which tells us that the rotor pack inside of the Whipple is a little bit better than what the 2650 is. But with the 2650 rotor pack, it can also be turned up a lot higher. You can spin a 2650 farther than you can a Whipple.
So of course we did make the change to the Pack 1232X springs for the entire run. So this was from the stock camshaft all the way through to the very last dyno pull with the Whipple. This was also done with brisk spark plugs. So we went through with that. Didn't have to really change any gapping or anything else like that. They did pretty well. Also was running Maxima oil. We ran the same oil like the entire time. We didn't have to do any oil changes or anything else like that.
Cut the filter open afterwards too,
yeah.
And it looked good. So the Hellcat engine is a beast. That's for sure. It's a workhorse.
We did use VP race gas. This was actually MS109. We went through gallons of it. We actually used up so much of it that we ended up needing to order some more because we have another project that was underway waiting for us to get off the dyno after that. So we used a lot of MS109. We also used Injector Dynamics 1300s. So ID 1300s, the injector data on those is amazing. So really, I harp about this. Gordon's going to harp about it as well. Make sure that you've got good injectors. Good injectors come with good injector data. And that injector data is going to save your life as far as like tuning is concerned and streetability, your startup, whether it be cold or hot, idle, all the mannerisms of your car will dynamically change when you have good injector data. I've seen it personally, getting really crappy bunk data from some of these guys that, I've had customers come in before at, with my other job where it's like they had data. It was really just copy and paste of what the OEM information was. And yeah, you just wanted to go, I don't know, jump off a building somewhere. We don't have cliffs here. It's flat. So yeah, anyway, I think that's pretty much the majority of what we've got.
We want to say thank you to all the partners that were involved in this, and that's Jesse from SDG, Aaron and Jeremy from Magnuson, and Chuck Harder and all the guys over there at Whipple. Of course, we want to say thanks to Greg Kong. Greg Kong is a good friend of ours, and he does a lot with us on the GM side of things. So we were happy to have him along on the Hellcat side. We also want to thank PWR for sending us their cooling bricks. We did use those on the Kong 2650 and the IHI. The IHI, like we said earlier in the video, the blower just doesn't put out a whole lot of heat, and the IHI cooling bricks are actually really pretty good. So we really didn't see much of a gain to put the PWR bricks in the IHI cooler or the IHI supercharger, but they worked swimmingly on the 2650 that was putting out boatloads of heat. Still kept like we said earlier, they kept the IATs going in the cylinder under 100 degrees.
No, it was a really good, thorough test. Honestly, I don't think anybody else is going to be able to do as thorough of a test like this. Of course, we blocked out a week for this, and we actually carried over into Monday. So it was a lot of work on this, a lot of people internally that helped us out as well. I want to thank the guys in the race shop for helping us out. I guess we owe Kurt some Diet Mountain Dew.
Chip, I'm all jacked up on Mountain Dew.
After all this is said and done. Also, something that you know, we joked about the Hellcat was a employee of the month, but also I guess the supporting actor in this was the pulley system, because this is something that we're actually going to have on the website listed as the trifecta pulley system, and so it's actually something that, you know, you'll see it throughout the whole video on this, is that, you know, we were able to use the same set of tensioners and idlers on this for the entire series and just adjust the configuration a little bit to maximize the blower wrap. It was freaking cool. We were able to make belt changes in like 5 minutes or less. So
Minutes.
Yeah.
And what that trifecta kit is it is the AAD add-on idler, which is, it basically fits either IHI, Whipple, or IHI, or the Magnusons, or the Kong, or the Whipple. That's the only two there is. If you have a Whipple, it's its own. If it's any other blower, it's the IHI one. The second part of that is the HHP adjustable tensioner bracket. And what that does is it indexes the dowel pin on where the tensioner can mount on the bracket itself. And then finally, the Blackbird tensioner that's got 120 degrees worth of movement in it. That helped tremendously. So between those three things together, your range of adjustability is more than you can see doing anything else. And you can obtain some serious belt wrap, which we'll show you some pictures in this. The Kong 2650 with the 275 upper is probably the best belt wrap I've ever seen on anything. I know a lot of people are going to say, why didn't you use the 3.8? Mostly because the 3.8 is, specifically the 3.8 is on my car still. Secondly, because the 3.8 is going to put down more power than we were really comfortable putting to a drop-in piston and rod short block. It's not really something that is, it's not really in the same ballpark as the other blowers that we were testing as well. It's more of a race-oriented blower with a 130 millimeter throttle body. What you'll see with a 130 millimeter throttle body is decreased drivability, harder to get it to idle. There's lots of reasons why you don't, if it is an everyday street car, a Whipple 3.0 is plenty of supercharger.
Yeah.
With a 108 millimeter throttle body, you will put well over 1,000 horsepower down to the tire.
If you guys have got any questions,
Yes.
feel free to comment in our videos. Just comment. Honestly, comments are a huge help because of the fact that maybe you guys see something that we missed, because I mean, this is a ton of data and a ton of information that we've gone through, and maybe we didn't address something quite in a way that you guys you know, might understand what we were going for. Also, feel free to give us a call. We've got our guys here ready to answer. There's tons and tons of information, and we have a wide variety of components available on our shelves to be able to, you know, spec out your ride. Whether it's a Hellcat or regular Gen 3 Hemi or an LS or LT or Fords, even with that. We supply parts for a wide variety of companies. And so we cover a lot of different avenues as far as performance, whether it be supercharged, turbocharged, naturally aspirated. But yeah, make sure you comment, share this with others, because the fact that this information is, it's free to you. We're not putting this behind a paywall. We're not making you guys, you know, pay for subscriptions or anything like that. This information is there for you to be able to learn and share with others to make the community better, so that you guys can enjoy hot rodding as it is and make things better for everybody around us. So thanks, Gordon, for the insane amount of work that you've done, because he spent, this has been months and months of work ahead of time just to get the video work done and to get this engine on the dyno. And so he's pulled just about every single string in the aftermarket to be able to make this happen for you guys. And so thanks, Gordon. Thanks everybody else that's here. Thank you to everybody that supplied us components for this. And it's a huge learning opportunity for all of us, including myself. And so appreciate it. Thank you guys. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, you know, ring the bell, whatever. And we will see you guys next time for another tech video. We have some more projects on the way, including going with some Gen 5 LT stuff. So we'll see you guys next time. Good? Yes. Hellcat time.